How can you just expect to one day stand up and leave the person you have known your entire life? So much so that they feel like a part of you? You know their hopes, their dreams, their loss, and their heartbreak. You have seen them fail and you have seen them at their worst. But you have also seen them dust themselves off and stand and start again. You have seen them in their good and their bad, and you have loved them through it all. How can you just walk away from that? High school sweethearts, married by 22, and now a decade later, ready to part ways in the false pretenses of parting on friendly terms. As if your heart isn't absolutely broken. You knew how much you loved them, but you never thought just how much in the last 10 years together, like you did in the last 10 months apart, ever since you filed that divorce. All this swirled in Dean's head as he watched Cass wrestle Ben into his pajamas. This was the first time they had been together since the day Dean packed and left. Every moment away had been torture, and yet he still could not bring himself to call or text, knowing the moment he heard Cass's voice, he'd break. He couldn't let himself go through with that. But their nephew had demanded to see his uncles, and so here they were, pretending everything was fine, even though the truth was far from it. Here, Ben, Uncle Dean's gonna tell you a story. No, Uncle Cass tells better stories. A pang of rejection went through Dean, but it was the truth after all. So, settling himself by the bed, he said, "All right then, Mr. Hotshot Writer, go on, tell your story." He expected a retort, maybe even a look of contempt. But when he raised his eyes, Cass was looking at him like he had done something adorable. Cass looked away and cleared his throat. In his element now, he started the story. Since the dawn of time, the moon has been in love with the sun. Existing in darkness with only the twinkle of faraway stars for company, the god of moon was lonely. One day, the arrival of the fabled sun god lit up the eastern sky, the first dawn casting even the moon into high relief. Castiel paused, tucking into himself as he reached for Ben's belly, wiggling his fingers against him to hear Ben giggle. "What did the sun look like, Uncle Cass?" Castiel's eyes lifted to Dean's. "He's tall and handsome, of course." Castiel looked back to Ben, with sun-kissed hair and stardust freckled across his cheeks and shoulders. Everyone loved him, and the moon in his shadow knew that such light wasn't meant for him. Each day the sun would rise, bringing with him the start of the day, and the moon would recede back into the blanket of stars, keeping his distance, loving the sun from afar. Until one day, Castor lifted his eyes to Dean's. The sun caught the moon in the pre-dawn light before he could hide away and said, "Hey moon, I've seen you around. Why don't we get some coffee sometime?" Ben giggled, and Dean felt a smile tug at his own lips, his gaze on the bedspread. Castor continued. And the moon, scared as he was by the sun's brilliance, quickly said no and ran off into the night. Ben gasped, and Castiel took a moment to fuss with his covers, tugging them up to his chin. And so it went for months on end, the sun chasing the moon across the sky, across time, their paths crossing closer and closer until a day when time seemed to stand still. Castiel's voice grew hushed. The moon stood before the sun, unable to speak, for he was so full of love for the man in front of him. The sun just took his hand and held it until it was time for them to part. Life's gravity tugging them in different directions, no matter how much they wanted to stay together. Castiel's eyes lifted, and Dean could feel them on him, but he didn't dare look up, his heart thundering against the lump in his throat. But the moon never forgot the sun. Couldn't possibly, when his light was the only thing that made him shine, and his love only grew, day after day. "Stop, Cass," Dean whispered. "Just stop." No matter where the moon went, how far he strayed, he never ever forgot it was the sun's warmth that made him whole. Castiel reached for Dean's hand, which laid atop Ben's stomach. It was the sun that chased away his darkness and filled his lonely days with light. Castiel was blurry in Dean's sight, so he looked down, hoping the tuck of his chin would hide the tear that dribbled down his cheek as he let himself rest his hand in Cass's. The cool metal of Castiel's wedding band searing into Dean's warm skin. The shock of the cool metal was enough for Dean to pull back. Enough story, Ben. Time to sleep. Dean's voice was gruff as he tucked Ben in, ignoring his whines. As they made their way into the hallway, Cass stopped Dean with a hand on his arm. Dean, stop, please. Please, Cass. I don't want to hurt anymore. I just want us to be okay. Tears were already streaming down his face, and he took one look at Dean and crossed the distance between them to take Dean into his arms. Dean had missed this, not just the physical proximity, but the feeling of safety that came with Cass, the feeling of home and reassurance. So he buried his face into the crook of his neck and let himself have this moment. It's gonna be okay, Dean. We'll figure something out. We always do. We are gonna be okay. Cass tightened his arms around him, and God help him, but Dean believed him. But he wasn't foolish. He knew words and one embrace wouldn't just fix things. That it had taken them years to grow apart, and his heart wouldn't heal in one night. But as he looked at Cass's face, he saw the boy he had met at school, his best friend. He saw the boy who was too lazy to cook for himself but walked all the way to a faraway vintage store just because they had Dean's favorite singer's collection. He saw the man who worked hard to get a promotion just so he could afford a house with Dean. He saw the man who cried at his wedding before he even saw the groom. He saw his Cass, and for now, it was enough. He didn't know how they were gonna do it, but they would figure something out. Maybe maybe it would be just like before, or maybe they'll have to take it one day at a time. But that would at least mean that they had time. Hope is a thing with feathers. And with Cass back in his arms and a future to look forward to, Dean could feel it fluttering in his chest.